Welcome to the debate. You know, when a medieval host wanted you out of their house, they wouldn't politely ask you to leave. They would actually just serve you a literal cold, tough shoulder of mutton.
Wait, like actual cold meat?
Yeah, actual cold meat.
I mean, I always assumed giving someone the cold shoulder just meant physically turning your back on them, you know?
Right, like it makes sense, but it is incredibly literal in its origin. But today, we use it as this instantaneous cultural capsule. And I think that brings us to the core of what we're exploring today. When we look at advanced language acquisition, specifically the monumental leap from, say, an upper intermediate B2 level to the C1 and C2 mastery levels of the CEFR framework, we are talking about a really profound cognitive shift here.
Oh, absolutely.
Because B2 is where you have operational independence. You can survive, you can articulate advantages and disadvantages, but moving into C1 and C2 requires something entirely different.
Yeah, it's the shift from concrete, functional communication into the realm of profound abstraction. You're no longer just, like, keeping the engine running. You are redesigning the vehicle while driving it.
Exactly. I love that analogy. And the central disagreement we are tackling today is how a learner actually achieves and demonstrates that ultimate mastery. So in attaining true advanced English proficiency, what is the more critical marker? I argue that the spontaneous deployment of culturally embedded idiomatic language, like our cold shoulder example, is the primary driver of this mastery.
And as you know, I take a fundamentally different view.
Shocking.
Well, I mean, while I acknowledge the historical charm of colloquialisms, I argue that precise vocabulary, structural narrative competence, and sophisticated discourse strategy form the true indispensable foundation of C1 and C2 proficiency.
Okay, let's break down why idioms are not just, charm, as you put it, but actually the secret ingredient that elevates a speaker from merely proficient to truly native-like.
Go on.
If you analyze the CEFR distinctions, right, the demarcation line for C1 is the capacity to recognize implicit meanings, to handle idiomatic expressions with spontaneous ease. A phrase like bite the bullet transcends mere vocabulary.
Does it, though?
Does. It packs emotional resonance and layers of insight way beyond literal translation. It is the ultimate test of advanced fluency because it proves the speaker has integrated the cultural subtext of the language into their active lexical resource. They aren't translating anymore. They're feeling the language.
I mean, I see the appeal of that imagery, but we are totally ignoring the actual epistemological demands of the C1 and C2 criteria here.
How so?
Because cultural flair cannot compensate for a lack of conceptual architecture. Structural sophistication and conceptual precision are far more critical indicators of advanced proficiency than, reciting colorful idioms.
Okay, but
The leap to mastery is fundamentally defined by the deployment of dense language. We are talking about abstract nouns, words like ambiguity, constraint, or sustainability, and highly precise verbs like advocate, consolidate, or undermine.
But doesn't that just reduce language to a dry academic exercise? I mean, who actually talks like that at a dinner party?
It's not about a dinner party, and no, not at all. Because true cognitive control is demonstrated through narrative architecture, the capacity to build context, to deliberately pace a narrative by varying sentence lengths, and to seamlessly deploy formal linking patterns.
Like what?
Like not only, but also, or be that as it may. This is what actually signifies mastery. Without this structural competence, an idiom is merely a decorative ornament on a fundamentally unstable foundation.
Wow. Decorative ornament. I disagree that idioms are just ornaments. Let's test this in a high-stakes environment, okay? Consider the C1 Advanced Speaking Examination.
Okay, a great benchmark.
If we look at parts 3 and 4 of that exam, candidates are placed in a crucible. In part 3, they have exactly 2 minutes to collaboratively discuss a complex prompt. Say, why life priorities like acquiring possessions or keeping up with technology have changed.
Right.
Then they have 1 minute to reach a consensus.
Which is a highly stressful cognitive load, certainly.
Exactly. And in that stress, spontaneity is paramount. Candidates excel when they utilize phrases like see eye to eye to negotiate agreement, or when they conceptualize societal pressures by referencing the need to keep up with the Joneses.
But
Wait, let me just finish this point. These idiomatic expressions facilitate immediate, authentic reactions to highly abstract paradigms. They demonstrate a nimble mind operating without the lag of translation. How else do you prove spontaneity if not through immediate cultural references?
let's look at what actually happens in the brain during that exam. You are equating conversational ornamentation with substantive negotiation.
It is substantive.
I would liken this to the cognitive mechanism of a debate. Yes, seeing eye to eye is a pleasant, natural-sounding phrase. But what if the candidate lacks the discourse markers to properly pivot the conversation?
Well, in a C1 speaking exam, true success originates from structured, logical comparisons.
You really don't think an idiom can anchor a logical comparison? I think an idiom is totally useless if you can't frame it. A candidate must utilize phrases like, I completely see your point, however, with the caveat that, or, as far as I am concerned, it depends entirely on the variable of.
Okay, now you just sound like a textbook.
Well, the research on storytelling and discourse meticulously outlines that a clear structure, a setup, a confrontation, and a resolution acts as essential signposting for the listener.
Sure, signposting is helpful.
It's critical. If a candidate drops an idiom about keeping up with the Joneses, but fails to structurally link it back to the prompt regarding media influence using a cohesive framework, the idiom doesn't save them. The linguistic competence evaluated here is the ability to sustain and structure an argument.
I feel like you're creating a false dichotomy here between structure and idiom. You're suggesting that idioms lack conceptual weight. But I would actually argue that many advanced concepts are most efficiently conveyed precisely through metaphorical idioms,
How?
because they function as highly efficient cognitive shortcuts.
How so exactly? Because a cognitive shortcut usually implies a lack of analytical depth. Like, you're skipping the hard part.
Not in human cognition, no. Our brains actually prefer imagery. Take the idiom hit the nail on the head. It originates from the literal precision required in carpentry.
Mm-hmm.
When a candidate uses this in an academic discussion, they aren't merely saying, I agree. They are acknowledging an exact, perhaps previously overlooked, core truth. They are invoking a visceral sense of exactitude.
It is vivid, yes, I'll give you that.
Right? Or consider burning the midnight oil. That traces back to the era before electricity. It doesn't just mean working late. It invokes a very specific image of diligent, solitary, and arduous nocturnal effort.
Okay, but no.
Think about it. When an individual attempts to convey these nuanced states using your preferred academic jargon, say engaging in protracted nocturnal diligence, it sounds utterly stilted. It fails to achieve the same pragmatic efficiency. Idioms synthesize complex intellectual and emotional landscapes into immediate, accessible imagery that the brain processes way faster than abstract Latin root words.
Well, that is a fascinating way to frame it, as a cognitive shortcut. But we have to return to the pragmatic register.
The pragmatic register.
Yes, advanced mastery is fundamentally defined by knowing unequivocally when to employ casual versus formal language. Relying excessively on those metaphorical shortcuts runs a massive risk of colloquializing an academic discourse.
But C1 and C2 aren't just about writing academic papers. It's about operating in any environment seamlessly.
True, but in a rigorous intellectual exchange, technical terminology is the absolute prerequisite. Let's say we are discussing the ramifications of global supply chain disruptions.
Okay.
Describing a situation as a bottleneck, yes, and quite effective, but if you lean on an idiom like the industry fell flat on its face, you entirely strip the argument of its analytical gravity.
I guess.
To truly elevate the discourse, a C2 user must deploy terms like inhibit, facilitate, or mitigate. These words possess a specific syntactic and semantic weight that idioms just lack. It is this conceptual precision that facilitates profound intellectual exchange.
I have to push back there because you're assuming that the ultimate goal of language is to sound like a peer-reviewed journal.
You're completely underestimating the inherent difficulty of processing these colloquial shortcuts in real time.
I'm really not.
Let's pivot from speaking to receptive skills, specifically listening comprehension.
A crucial metric, absolutely.
The linguistic data analyzing vocabulary levels from A1 to C2 is incredibly clear on this. Listening is frequently far more demanding than reading. Why? Because when you're reading, you can pause. You can analyze the syntax, you can look at the Latin root of facilitate or mitigate and decode it.
Right.
But in real-time, unstructured speech, there is no pause button. Recognizing a phrase like in the dark or put two and two together triggers an entirely different cognitive mechanism.
Because you have to bypass the literal meaning instantaneously.
Exactly. The literal translation of put two and two together is simple arithmetic. But decoding it instantaneously as an act of intelligent inference or understanding that being in the dark signifies deliberate exclusion from information requires immense cognitive flexibility. You are processing metaphor at conversational speed. This real-time processing of idiomatic language is the single highest hurdle for advanced learners. If you can do that, you have reached C2 listening mastery.
Look, you rightly identify the intense cognitive load in listening comprehension. It is genuinely exhausting to process a second language in real time. But I fundamentally disagree with your conclusion about how that cognitive load is actually managed by the brain.
You don't think understanding the idioms reduces the load?
No, I think memorizing a vast catalog of idioms is just adding more data to the pile. Cognitive load is managed by the speaker's mastery of narrative context and structure.
I'm not following.
Let's borrow an analogy from cognitive productivity. The modern human mind processing a second language is like a computer with 50 web tabs open. It is running heavy background processes, translating, checking grammar, analyzing tone, resulting in that metaphorical rainbow wheel of death, mental fatigue.
Right, yeah, we've all felt that in a foreign language. Your brain just shuts down.
Exactly. Listening to an unstructured, idiom-heavy monologue creates that exact mental fatigue. But what closes those mental tabs? Strong narrative details and explicit discourse markers. By establishing a clear setup and utilizing predictable narrative arcs, the speaker allows the listener to anticipate the vocabulary.
So you're saying the structure is what gives the brain a break?
Yes. If I use a cohesive framework, signposting my arguments with on the one hand and conversely, I am effectively handing you a map of my thoughts.
A map?
Yes. Even if you don't know a specific vocabulary word or an idiom, the rigorously structured context allows you to infer its meaning effortlessly. The structure dictates comprehension far more heavily than the isolated recognition of an idiom.
Okay, the computer tab analogy makes a lot of sense for explaining cognitive fatigue. I'll give you that. But let me challenge the idea that structure and context are the ultimate saviors of comprehension.
Go ahead.
Let's say you are listening to a complex negotiation. The context is perfectly clear. The narrative arc is established, the discourse markers are all there, but suddenly the opposing speaker says, look, we need to tighten our belts and realize that time is of the essence.
Which is a very common real-world scenario.
Right. Now, a listener who only understands literal structural English will fundamentally misunderstand the stakes of that sentence.
Will they?
Absolutely. They might grasp from the context that there's a problem, but they miss the specific pragmatic reality. Tightening one's belt is a visceral physical image of financial austerity and starvation. Time is of the essence is a rigid directive born from strict legal contracts.
Well,
These phrases dictate the entire reality of the negotiation. If you cannot decode the historical and cultural weight embedded in those exact phrases, your comprehension remains totally superficial. You are tracking the plot, but you are completely missing the theme.
That assumes the idiom operates independently of the narrative, which it does not. If we look at how those very idioms are successfully internalized by learners, we arrive right back at narrative and structure. Let's look at the pedagogical technique of show, don't tell.
Ah, the classic storytelling rule.
Precisely. To effectively grasp a concept like anger, a master communicator doesn't just list idioms about frustration. They describe the clenched fists, the furrowed brow, the sharp edge in the voice. By anchoring vocabulary to a multisensory narrative experience, the language is cemented in the learner's memory. Take the idiom blow off steam.
Originating from the Industrial Revolution?
Yes, from the mechanical pressure valves of steam engines. Understanding that idiom on a C2 level requires understanding the underlying narrative. Pressure is building dangerously, and it requires an immediate, controlled release to avoid a catastrophic explosion.
Right.
The idiom is entirely subservient to the narrative mechanism of pressure and release. Without the structural capacity to build that context, the idiom is just an abstract floating entity that the learner will forget tomorrow.
Okay, I see how teaching it requires a narrative, but performing it in the real world is different.
But performance is just the real-time application of that structural logic. Furthermore, the capacity to manipulate syntax to reflect that narrative, using short, sharp sentences to create urgency, or longer, complex sentences adorned with abstract nouns for deep reflection, that is a higher-order cognitive skill.
Syntactic manipulation.
Exactly. It directly controls the pacing of the discourse. A single idiom simply cannot dictate the flow of thought the way structural mastery can.
Well, I will concede that pacing and syntax are incredibly powerful tools. I can't deny that. But I think you are missing the final, most crucial element of fluency. The moment a candidate moves from the mechanical application of learned rules to the organic expression of human thought.
What is that?
That moment is undeniably linked to colloquial ease. It is about navigating the nuances of human connection.
You mean empathy?
Exactly. Cultural empathy. When discussing relationships at a C2 level, for instance, distinguishing between an instantaneous, fierce connection, like getting on like a house on fire, and the deliberate, calculated snub of giving the cold shoulder, requires a profound level of cultural attunement.
I suppose.
You have to understand how native speakers perceive heat, danger, warmth, and coldness. This cultural attunement bridges the gap between mechanical fluency and authentic communication. It is the literal difference between speaking a language and truly inhabiting it.
It is a beautiful sentiment, truly. But we must remain grounded in the empirical parameters of advanced assessment. Empathy is vital for human connection, yes, but the true intellectual marker of C1 and C2 proficiency remains the architectural integrity of thought.
You really don't think inhabiting the language is an intellectual marker?
I think it is an emotional one. The intellectual marker is the ability to articulate a complex, multi-layered opinion, to systematically evaluate the effects of a paradigm shift on education versus medicine, and to synthesize those disparate points into a coherent, logically sound conclusion using varied lexicogrammatical structures.
That is a mouthful.
But that is the zenith of language acquisition. It is the capacity for abstract reasoning facilitated by conceptual precision and sophisticated discourse management that defines the highest echelons of linguistic mastery. You can inhabit a language all you want, but if you cannot structure your abstract thoughts, you cannot participate in its highest level discourses.
Well, and so we find our positions thoroughly illuminated, even if they remain in considerable tension. I will continue to maintain that idiomatic mastery and cultural attunement are the essential vital signs of true native-like proficiency. They are the elements that bypass the translation lag and breathe life into the mechanical structures.
Well, I stand firm in the conviction that sophisticated narrative structure, conceptual precision, and rigorous discourse management are the true foundational architecture. Without them, the ideas simply can't stand on their own.
What we undeniably converge upon, though, is the reality of the leap itself.
Oh, certainly.
The transition from the B2 plateau to the C1 and C2 summits requires a profound, almost exhaustive, cognitive shift in real-time language processing.
Absolutely. Whether one is expending cognitive bandwidth trying to decode the cultural color of colloquialisms or managing the architectural integrity of narrative thought, the demand on the learner's brain is immense. It requires viewing the language through multiple overlapping lenses simultaneously.
It really is a testament to the sheer complexity of the human brain and the richness of the linguistic material we've analyzed today. We have built the house, but deciding how to live in it, whether to prioritize the structural beams or the vibrant cultural tapestries, remains a fascinating pursuit. There is certainly much more to uncover in the depths of language mastery, but we will leave the final conclusions to you.